My sister pushed the $5,300 check across the empty dessert plates and said, "You weren't invited to dinner. You were invited to pay." My mother laughed. She wasn't embarrassed or nervous. She looked completely comfortable, like a woman watching a plan work exactly as expected. This was supposed to be my parents' 40th anniversary dinner, the one my mother had personally invited me to. There was no chair for me. The table was set for 8. The meal was already over. My mother had insisted it started at 9. I arrived at 8:55. I teach high school English in Tucson. That check was more than a month of my salary, and everyone at that table knew it. I didn't open my purse. I didn't raise my voice. I simply asked for the manager. "Remember what I asked you earlier?" He nodded once. My sister's face lost its color. They had planned the evening carefully. They just planned it around the wrong woman. "My name is Rosie Collier. I'm 36 years old. Welcome back to Family Line Drama, where ordinary people face impossible family situations and walk away with their dignity intact. If you've ever been expected to pay, stay quiet, and swallow the insult, this story is for you. Drop a comment and subscribe." To understand that night, you need to go back 1 month to a phone call from my father. It came on a Tuesday in the middle of April, a little after 7 in the evening. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of junior essays on The Great Gatsby, red pen in hand, when his name appeared on my screen. Tom Collier. I stared at it for 2 full rings before answering. You have to understand something. By April, my family and I had been in a kind of quiet freeze for 6 months. Not a blow-up or a screaming match. Nothing you could point to and say that was where it broke. Just shorter texts, calls that stopped coming, holidays that felt like appointments. I'll explain why later. Because the reason matters. But that night, all I knew was that my father was calling me for the first time in weeks. And my chest did that foolish, hopeful thing chests sometimes do. "Rosie girl," he said. Nobody else had ever called me that. Not once in 36 years. "Hey, Dad." He cleared his throat the way he does when he's rehearsed something and it isn't going according to plan. "Your mother and I? It's 40 years next month, May 16th. 40 years, Rosie girl. We're having a dinner." Nothing crazy. Family, the Hollands, your Aunt Deb. I waited. It would mean something to me if you were there. He said it wouldn't be 40 years without me in the room. There was a version of me that would have asked questions. Where? Who planned it? Why now, after half a year of 2-word replies? That version of me was sitting there at the table holding a red pen and keeping quiet. Because another version, the one who had spent her whole life waiting for someone in that family to say, "You matter to me," out loud, answered first. "Of course, Dad. I'll be there." "Good," he said. I could hear him smiling. We talked for another 4 minutes about his tomatoes, my students, and nothing important at all. When I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't felt since before November. I felt invited. Then, during the first week of May, my mother called. That should have been my second warning because she hadn't voluntarily dialed my number in 6 months. "Rosemary?" Her voice was warm, actually warm, not the warmth she performs at church, the real one, the voice I had stopped hearing years ago. "I want you there. It wouldn't be 40 years without you." Almost the exact words my father had used. I noticed that. I told myself it was sweet. Looking back, I understand it was a script, and my father was the only person who hadn't been given a copy. She gave me the details as though she were reading a gift tag. La Vista Deli, a resort restaurant in the Catalina foothills, the kind of place with valet parking and a wine list thicker than a Bible. "We have the terrace room," she said. "Dinner starts at 9. 9? I asked. "That's late for you guys." "That's when the terrace room opens for us," she said smoothly. "Everything's arranged. Just come." The next morning, she sent me a confirmation. "Dinner starts at 9. Terrace room. Don't be late. You know how your father hates waiting." And at the end was a small red heart. My mother hadn't sent me a heart in 6 months. I sat with that message longer than I want to admit. Then I did what hopeful people do. I went shopping. I bought a card. I wrote it, read it, tore it up, and bought another. What do you say to 2 people married for 40 years when you're not even sure they like you? On the third card, I stopped trying to be clever and simply wrote the truth. 40 years. I hope I come from something that can last. Then I did the thing I'd been thinking about since Dad's call. There was exactly one photograph from my parents' wedding day that survived 4 decades and 3 moves. A 1986 print of the two of them outside the church. My mother was 24 and laughing so hard her eyes were closed. She looked like a woman I'd never met. At some point, water damaged the print, and a brown stain had been spreading across the corner like a storm cloud for as long as I could remember. I took it to a restoration shop near the university, $60. The man removed the stain, reprinted the photograph, mounted it in a simple frame, and placed his shop's small gold sticker on the backing paper, with the price written beside it. When he handed it back, my mother was laughing beneath a clear sky. I remember thinking, this is what I do. I fix the picture. I should have questioned why a woman who had eaten dinner at 5:30 every night for 40 years had booked a table for 9. But hope doesn't read fine print. Hope just RSVPs. If you want to understand why I said yes so quickly, why I had always said yes, you have to go back further than April. You have to go back to a blue cast. I was 12. I fell from the top of the bleachers during PE and landed badly. I knew the way you know that my arm was broken. And here is what I didn't realize was unusual until I became an adult. I walked myself to the nurse's office. I didn't cry or ask anyone to come with me. I sat in that small room, holding my own arm like a package I was responsible for. When the school finally reached my mother, she was already leaving work early for my sister. Courtney was 9. She had a piano recital that night and had been crying about it for 2 days. My mother had promised to take her for ice cream first to calm her nerves. So Dad came to the emergency room instead, straight from work in his boots, smelling like solder. My mother arrived 2 hours later with Courtney in her recital dress. I was sitting on the hospital bed with a brand new blue cast when my mother looked at me. I will never forget it. With something close to pride, she said, "See, you're the strong one. You don't need the fuss." I glowed. I really did. I thought it was a compliment. It took me 24 years to understand that the sentence wasn't praise. It was a job description. Because that's how our house worked for as long as I could remember. There were 2 daughters and 2 different expectations. Courtney was delicate. Courtney needed. Courtney received. I was sturdy. I managed. I provided. Nobody voted on it. It was simply the way things were. Nobody signed my cast, by the way. It came off 6 weeks later as blue and blank as the day they put it on. Fast forward 24 years, and the roles hadn't changed at all. Only the price tags had. I became a teacher. 12 years now at the same high school in Tucson, teaching English to teenagers who think Gatsby is boring until the final chapter, when suddenly it isn't. I make $58,000 a year. I drive a Corolla that just turned 11. I grade 92 essays on a good weekend, and I love my life more than my family has ever understood. Courtney took a different path. She met Preston Marsh at a golf club fundraiser, connected to a commercial real estate family firm in Scottsdale, and married him in 2019 in a dress that cost more than my car was worth at the time. From the outside, she was set. Brunches, a house with a pool. That was the image my mother carried around like a wallet photo. "Your sister married well," Mom liked to say, usually while looking at my shoes. "You chose a calling. Choices have costs." Here's what I noticed, though. Over the years of family dinners, small things were filed away without me knowing why I was remembering them. Courtney never had her card. She'd pat her purse and laugh. "Preston has the cards. I can never keep track." And the check would sit in the middle of the table like an orphan. Then it would drift. That's the only word for it. The check drifted. At Mom's 60th birthday dinner, Easter, Mother's Day, and that overpriced brunch place Courtney chose, nobody directly asked me to pay. Asking would have made it a favor, and favors get remembered. Instead, there would be this comfortable silence, and my mother would smile at whoever was hosting us and say, "Got it." She always does. She'd say it to the waiter, to the Hollands, to the room. Never directly to me. It wasn't a request. It was a weather report. The bills became larger every year. So did the silence around them. Mother's Day 2024 is the example I remember because it showed the entire system in miniature. Courtney picked the place, a rooftop brunch spot in Phoenix, 2 hours away from me and halfway for her. She ordered for the table like a cruise director. Bottomless mimosas. The seafood tower, because Mom deserves it. When the check arrived, it was $380. My sister did the purse pat and gave her little laugh. Preston has the cards. I can never keep track. Preston, for the record, was sitting right there. He didn't move. He didn't even look up. It took me years to understand why. Because somewhere along the way, my family had taught him that this was already handled. There was a system, and the system had a name. The name was me. The check sat in the middle of the table. My mother looked toward the skyline. Aunt Deb reached for her purse, and my mother put a hand on her arm, actually stopping her. She said, "Got it." She always does. Deb's hand went back down, and I paid because 11 people were waiting for their Sunday to continue. And the fastest way to make a moment stop hurting had always been my debit card. On the drive home, 2 hours alone with the radio off, I did something I'd never done before. I added it up. Not just the money, the pattern. Every birthday, every holiday, every celebration going back 5 years, and the number of times anyone at those tables had said thank you. The money took me 20 minutes to calculate. The thank took no time at all. I want to be fair, so let me tell you about my father, because he is not my mother. This story doesn't work if you think he is. In the fall of 2021, Dad had a heart attack. A small one, they kept saying, as if hearts came with a sizing chart. He was 63. He had been running his one-man heating and cooling business out of a van since before I was born. After that October, he slowly wound it down. He sold the good tools to a younger man he trusted and kept the van in the driveway like a retired horse. Money became tight in a way my parents were too proud to admit. But my father has something he does instead of talking. He keeps a notebook. A small spiral notebook with a cover softened and darkened by years of work grease, usually kept in his shirt pocket. In it, written in his slanted mechanic's handwriting, he records every kindness anyone does for the family. A neighbor who repaired the gate, Aunt Deb covering a pharmacy run, amounts, dates, names. A man should know what he owes, he told me once, tapping the cover. He meant it as a matter of honor. I found it touching and a little heartbreaking. One afternoon, while he was in the garage, I looked through a few pages. Not snooping, just curious, and I noticed something I couldn't explain at the time. The Hollands were listed. Deb was listed. Courtney appeared more than once. My name was almost nowhere. I told myself Dad simply hadn't gotten around to my page. The truth was worse. My page existed. It just had someone else's name on it. But I'm getting ahead of the story. In June 2022, 8 months after Dad's heart attack, my mother sat me down at her kitchen table and held my hand. She never held my hand. She cried at exactly the right speed. "Just until your father's back on his feet," she said. "The bills, Rosie, the property tax, his medications, I can't put this on him. His heart can't handle worrying." I said yes before she finished. Of course I did. $400 a month. I did the math right there against my own budget and decided the summer trip to Oregon could wait a year. The Corolla could last another year too, which eventually became a promise. I made that car last 4 falls in a row. Then came the detail. The small hinge the whole story turns on. "Send it to Courtney," my mother said, patting my hand. "She handles our bills online now, sweetheart. You know your father and phones." And that made sense. It really did. Courtney lived on her phone. Dad thought Zelle was a woman's name. So on the first of every month, beginning in June 2022, my banking app sent $400 to Courtney M. with a note that never changed. First of the month, every month. I never missed one, and I never asked for a receipt. Family doesn't ask for receipts. That's what I believed. Right up until an afternoon when a water heater taught me otherwise. It was the first week of November 2025. Dad's laptop had picked up a virus that filled the screen with flashing warnings, and I drove to Oro Valley on a Saturday to clean it off, the way I always did. He hovered behind me with a cup of coffee. He wasn't drinking it. He was narrating. "That's the one. That red button there." I love that man. When the laptop was working again, he squeezed my shoulder. "You're good to us, Rosie girl," he said. "The little things. The $50 you slip your mother now and then. Don't think I don't notice." I kept my eyes on the screen. "The $50 here?" He pulled the notebook from his shirt pocket, proud, flipping the pages with his thumb. "I keep it all in here. A man should know what he owes." He turned the notebook toward me and tapped a line halfway down a page. He was smiling. "Water heater, $1,100. Courtney, April 2025. Your sister took care of that water heater last spring, he said. Didn't even blink. $1,100 just like that. I don't know what we'd do without that girl. I looked at the line. I looked at his thumb resting beneath my sister's name, with so much pride in his expression that it hurt to watch. By April 2025, I had sent $400 every month for 35 straight months. Do the math. Somewhere between my bank account and my father's notebook, my money was going in one direction and coming out the other side, carrying my sister's name. Dad, I said very carefully, did Mom ever mention money from me every month? He frowned, thinking hard, wanting to give me an answer. He told me something. You help when you can. The $50 here and there. He smiled. Every bit matters, honey. Every bit matters. I closed the laptop and told him it was working perfectly again. I hugged him, and he smelled like coffee and WD-40, just as he had my entire life. Then I walked into the kitchen, where my mother was drying dishes that were already dry. I kept my voice quiet. That's important to mention. I didn't walk in angry or confrontational. I approached her the same way I had approached her my whole life, quietly and giving her space. Mom, the $400 a month? Dad thinks I send you $50 sometimes. The dish towel continued moving. She didn't ask what I meant. Remember that. She never asked a single question about what I was talking about. And there is only one reason someone avoids asking that question. Your sister has pressures you don't understand, she said to the counter. The water heater in his notebook is under her name. Mom, it got paid, didn't it? She turned around, and her expression was already prepared, patient, hurt, disappointed in me. It was the same face she'd been making since the blue cast. Don't do this to your family over money, Rosemary. Your family. As if I were standing outside the house throwing rocks through the windows. I stood in my mother's kitchen and understood three things in a single breath. My sister had been receiving my money for 3.5 years. My mother knew about it. And the real offense in that house would never be taking the money. The offense would be that I had noticed. I didn't yell. I want that on the record. Whatever else is true, I said, okay, which is what I say when nothing is okay. I drove home with the radio off. That night, I opened my banking app. The November transfer had already gone through on the 1st of the month. $400 to Courtney M. for Mom and Dad. I looked at 42 months of that same little note stacked one after another. Then I found the recurring payment and pressed cancel. The app asked if I was sure. My thumb hovered over the button for one breath. Recurring transfer canceled. That's all it said. No thunder. Just a gray line of system text. It was the loudest sentence I'd written in years. I didn't announce it. No speech, no ultimatum, no group text. In my family, money never announced itself when it arrived. But I knew it would make itself heard when it stopped. And it did, quietly, the way everything in my family seemed to happen. December's calls didn't come. My texts were answered in 2 words, then one. And then Christmas happened. Christmas 2025. My mother texted me that dinner was at 6. I still have the message. Dinner at 6. Don't be late. I walked in 10 minutes before 6 with a tin of cookies in a gift bag, and the turkey was already cold on the counter. The wrapping paper had already been folded into the recycling. Courtney and Preston were putting on their coats. Dinner was at 4. You must have misread the text, sweetheart, my mother said without even looking flustered, reaching past me for a serving dish. Everyone else managed. I stood in my parents' hallway holding cookies for a dinner that had already happened without me. And I did something new. I checked right there. My coat was still on. The text clearly said 6. I scrolled upward and noticed something for the first time because I'd never had a reason to look before. The time had come to me the same way family arrangements always came to me now. Relayed, passed along. Mom says dinner's at 6. Sent by Courtney. I ate leftovers on a stool in the kitchen, from a plate someone had already covered with plastic wrap and labeled in my mother's handwriting, Rosie's. My portion had been set aside in advance. They had planned for my absence before I was absent. I told myself Christmas was a mistake, a crossed wire. Families have those. 5 months later, my mother made the same mistake again, down to the minute. Except this time, I checked first. The morning of May 16 was, on paper, one of the best mornings of the school year. Finals week was finished. I sat on my back patio with coffee and the last stack of exams. I gave a student named Diego the A he'd been working toward all semester, and I felt that end-of-year lightness teachers probably experience only a few times in a decade. The blue dress I'd chosen was ironed and hanging on the closet door. The anniversary card was signed. And on my kitchen table, wrapped in brown paper, was the restored wedding photograph. My mother, 24 years old, laughing beneath a clear sky, the dark stain gone from the corner as if it had never existed. I taped a small note to the wrapping. For the two of you. Around 2, I did the most teacher-like thing in the world. I confirmed. I have spent 12 years confirming things. Field trip numbers, parent phone numbers, which day the fire drill actually happens. Confirming isn't suspicion in my line of work. It's how you keep 30 teenagers from being left at a museum. So when I decided to call La Vista Deli, I genuinely wasn't investigating my family. I wanted one thing, a seat next to my father. If I was walking back into that family after 6 frozen months, I wanted to spend the evening beside the one person in it who still called me Rosie Girl. At 2:15, I called the restaurant, La Vista Deli desk. Hi, my family has a reservation tonight. The anniversary dinner. I was hoping to request a seat next to Tom Collier. I'm his daughter. Keys clicked. Collier. I have a Collier Marsh party of 8, 7. Terrace room. Sorry, party of 8 at 7? I laughed slightly. There should be 9 of us, and I was told 9. Maybe there are 2 reservations. The keys stopped clicking. Oh, the hostess said, and her voice changed. It actually brightened, the way someone's voice does when a missing piece suddenly fits. Wait, are you the 9 guest? We were told to watch for you. The restaurant's music continued quietly through the phone. Some jazz piece. I remember every note of those 7 seconds. Told? I asked. Told by whom? There was a pause. I heard a muffled hand cover the receiver. Then another voice came onto the line. Older. Careful. The voice of a man who had spent 20 years standing between kitchens and customers. Ma'am, this is Nate Sullivan. I'm the general manager. Who am I speaking with, please? Rosie Collier. Tom and Sandra Collier are my parents. Tonight is their 40th anniversary. I was invited at 9. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, I could hear him carefully choosing each word. Miss Collier, the reservation this evening is at 7 for 8 guests under Collier Marsh. There's an instruction sheet with our desk. It asks that the check for the evening be presented to a 9th guest arriving at 9. He paused. There's a photograph attached for identification. It was dropped off Thursday. I'm sorry. I assumed you knew. I looked at my kitchen wall for a long time. There was a small spot of paint near the light switch, a slightly different white from when I touched it up 2 summers ago. I stared at it as if it owed me money. A photograph of me had been left at a restaurant desk so strangers would know which woman was supposed to receive the bill. Miss Collier, are you still there? I'm here. My voice came out level, which surprised me. Mr. Sullivan, does the instruction sheet say anything else? Another pause. This one was longer, and I heard something human in it. A man realizing he was holding one corner of something ugly. It notes that the 9th guest is not being seated for dinner service, he said quietly. The table is set for 8. Not being seated for dinner service. They had written it down. My family had put it in writing and handed it to strangers. She is not here to eat. I'm sorry, Nate Sullivan said again, and he meant it. Somehow, the kindness of a man I'd never met made the whole situation worse. Strangers were apologizing for my family's handwriting. I thought about my father's voicemail from April, still saved. 40 years, Rosie Girl. I thought about the brown paper package on my table. I thought about the plate labeled Rosie's, already covered in plastic wrap before I ever rang the doorbell. Then I stopped thinking about them and started thinking about that evening. Mr. Sullivan, I said, don't change anything about this evening. Don't cancel anything. Don't warn anyone. Don't treat the party any differently. But I'd like to ask you for 2 small things. I pulled my grading notebook across the table and wrote 2 short lines in it. I write objectives on a whiteboard the same way because saying a plan aloud makes it real, but writing it down makes it yours. The first thing, I said, is this. Tonight, at some point, I'm going to ask you a question in front of my family. When I do, just tell the truth. Whatever they ask, Whatever I ask, just the truth, out loud. Then I paused. And the second thing, he said, "Yes, ma'am," to both. Before we ended the call, the man who owed me nothing said one more thing quietly, almost as if it wasn't part of his job. "For what it's worth, Miss Collier, I've worked a lot of anniversaries. I've never had a request like theirs." "Neither have I said. "And I've been in this family for 36 years. By 2:30 that afternoon, a restaurant full of strangers knew more about the truth of my evening than my own family had told me in 6 months. I want to be honest about the next 3 hours because they weren't cold, clean, or cinematic. I drafted a text declining. I deleted it. I sat on my bedroom floor in the iron blue dress with my back against the bed and played my father's April voicemail twice. "It would mean something to me if you were there." He didn't know. I would have bet my car on it. My father cannot keep a secret from me. His ears turned red. Whatever tonight was, it had been built around him too. That's what finally got me off the floor. Not anger, curiosity almost. The terrible, load-bearing kind. I wasn't driving up that hill to be their daughter anymore. I understood that now. I was driving up to see with my own eyes exactly how far they would go, and to make sure that this time, for once, the ending had not already been ordered. I put the anniversary card in my purse. And I want you to know this about me. I still packed the wedding photograph. Brown paper, little note, all of it. Whatever they had planned for me, I had planned a gift for them. And I've never been able to arrive anywhere empty-handed. Maybe that's the wound. Maybe it's simply who I want to be. Regardless of them, I've decided it can be both. At 8:25, I started the car. 25 minutes to the foothills. Before we drive up that hill together, I'm curious about you. My family thought they knew exactly what I would do when that check landed in front of me. You've heard what I asked the manager. One question and one favor I haven't told you about yet. Drop your guess in the comments. What do you think the second request was? What was the second thing? I read every single guess, and I promise the answer is smaller and worse for my sister than most people expected. My family believed they had planned the perfect evening. They had. Just not for the person they claimed to invite. The road to La Vista Deli climbs out of the city along Campbell Avenue and into the dark edges of the Catalinas. The higher you go, the more Tucson spreads below you like a box of jewelry spilled open. It's beautiful. I've always thought so. That night, I barely noticed it. I handed my keys to the valet at 8:50 and sat in the car for one extra moment before getting out. It was the same breath I take outside a classroom on the first day of school, when the room is filled with people who think they already know how the year will go. The dashboard clock read 8:52. When I finally opened the door, the lobby smelled of mesquite smoke and expensive candles. Stone floors, a wall of glass overlooking the city lights. At the host stand, a young woman in a black dress looked up at me, and her eyes reacted before she said anything. They moved down to the reservation sheet, then back to my face. Recognition before I had spoken a word. I followed her glance. There it was, clipped to the corner of the sheet where a business card might have been. A photograph printed on plain paper. My face. I knew the picture. It had been cropped from a photograph on my sister's Instagram. Dad's 65th birthday, 3 years earlier. It was the last family picture I appeared in. In the original, I was laughing at something Dad had said, my shoulder leaning against his. In the version at the host stand, the crop was so tight that part of my shoulder was gone. They hadn't simply given strangers my photograph. They had cut me out of a family picture to make it. And the edit had removed the exact place where I had been touching my father. "Ma'am, right this way?" the hostess said, her face turning deep red. And I understood that my 2:15 phone call had made this young woman's entire shift much more complicated. "It's all right," I told her quietly. Then, because I meant it, I added, "Leave the photo where it is." She blinked. "I want it right there," I said, "where it can testify later." The walk to the terrace room was maybe 60 feet through the main dining room, past couples sitting over candlelight. I heard my family before I saw them. That particular pitch in my mother's voice when she's speaking to an audience, her laugh slightly brighter than it is at home. The terrace room had its own glass wall, its own view, and one long table. And on that table, the evening had already existed without me. Dessert plates were scraped clean. 2 Cabernet bottles sat upside down in a wine bucket. I had learned from the check that they cost $240 each. There were champagne flutes with only traces of the toast left, a cake plate holding nothing but crumbs, and one sugared flower nobody wanted. 8 chairs, 8 place settings, used and finished. There was no ninth chair. There wasn't even a space where a ninth chair had been squeezed in. The table had been arranged from the beginning for exactly the family they intended to feed. You can tell a lot about a family by what they set the table for. Mine had set it for 8 plates and 1 wallet. They were all there. My father sat at the head of the table, jacket off and tie loose, happy in that rumpled way he has. My mother sat beside him wearing her good pearls. Aunt Deb and her husband Ray were there. So were Jean and Carol Holland, my parents, neighbors of 30 years, who taught me to ride a bike in their driveway. Preston was checking his phone below the table, and my sister Courtney was wearing white. She wears white to other people's celebrations. It's a whole thing with her. Her chair was angled slightly toward the door, toward me. She had been watching it. My mother saw me, and her face lit up. I need you to understand what kind of expression it was, because I've replayed it 100 times. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't relief. It wasn't, oh, good, she made it. It was the look on a director's face when the final actor finally hits the mark. There she is, my mother sang, opening her arms without actually standing. My father's entire face became confused in the gentlest way. He half rose from his chair, and his napkin slid from his lap. Rosie, I thought you couldn't come to dinner. My mother's hand landed on his wrist, light. Practiced. Let her get settled first. There was nowhere for me to get settled. Everyone at that table could see it. Nobody said anything. I hugged my father. He smelled like coffee and the good cologne he wears twice a year. He held on 1 beat longer than usual, and against my ear he quietly said, "Glad you made it, Rosie girl," in the voice of a man who had been told a story and was trying to make it fit the person standing in front of him. "I thought you couldn't come to dinner." 7 words. Someone had told my father a story about that night. A story where I was the person who had declined the meal. I filed it away. I was filing everything now. The next 10 minutes were small talk performed over something already dead. Aunt Deb hugged me tightly and asked about my students, the only genuine question I received all night. But she wouldn't quite meet my eyes, and her hands were cold. Carol Holland said, "It was lovely to see you." Courtney looked at my dress and said, "That blue is so brave," which in my sister's language meant cheap. And I watched my mother do the thing she had done my whole life, the thing I never had a name for until that night. Before every sentence, her eyes moved around the room. She checked the other tables, the Hollands, her audience. My mother had never really spoken a sentence to me. She spoke them in front of people. "We'd have waited, sweetheart," she told the table. "But you know how the kitchen is. Everything comes when it comes." A small laugh, another sweep of the eyes. "And you did say 9. You did say 9. Filed. "And wasn't it wonderful?" My mother continued, turning toward the Hollands and gathering the evening back into her hands. "Courtney put this whole night together, you know. Every detail. The room, the wine, everything." She smiled proudly at my sister. Courtney tipped her head in modest acknowledgement, the golden child accepting her crown. I don't know what we'd do without her. I do, I thought. You'd read the fine print. Because I was doing the math even as my mother spoke. Every detail. The room. The wine. My sister, who couldn't produce a credit card at brunch, had booked a terrace room with a deposit, ordered 2 $240 bottles of Cabernet, and arranged a champagne toast at a resort. On what? Sometime during those 6 months, my sister had promised our mother a 40th anniversary worthy of the wallet photo. And sometime after that, she had solved the only problem with the promise. Me. I was the solution. I had always been the solution. The only difference was that this time they had put the solution in writing and left it at the front desk. Preston glanced at his watch. Not rudely, just a man checking a schedule. Then I watched my sister catch the eye of a server across the room and give a tiny nod. It could have been a twitch, but it was a signal, and it had clearly been rehearsed. Courtney didn't ask for a dessert menu. She didn't ask for coffee, another bottle of wine, or another round for the table. She asked for the check that was already printed. It arrived in 11 seconds. I counted because by then I was counting everything. 11 seconds on a Saturday night in a full restaurant. A leather folder doesn't move that quickly unless it has been sitting at the service station waiting for its turn. And this one had been waiting since 8:40. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The server placed the folder in the middle of the table, equally distant from everyone, exactly as they're trained to do. It sat there for 1 second. 2. Then my sister reached out with 2 fingers. Just 2, the way you'd move something slightly unpleasant. She slid it across the tablecloth, past the dessert plates, past the empty champagne glasses, in one smooth motion that ended directly in front of me. She smiled. The table became quiet. "You weren't invited to dinner," Courtney said lightly, as though delivering the punchline to a joke everyone else had already heard. "You were invited to pay." My mother laughed. I have heard my mother's laughs my entire life. The church laugh, the phone laugh, the laugh she gives at Dad's jokes half a beat late. This one was none of those. It was low, comfortable, and relieved. The laugh of a woman who had been holding her breath through a long approach and had finally felt the wheels touch the runway. Nothing about that laugh was surprised. It had been waiting all evening for its cue, and the cue had arrived exactly on time. "Courtney?" Aunt Deb's voice was sharp and small. My sister didn't even turn her head. My mother did. One look at Deb, the same look I had received at 12 when I asked why nobody came to the school. Deb's mouth closed. My father looked from the folder to my sister, then to my mother, like a man trying to read a road sign through rain. "What is this?" he asked. "What is Sandra? What is she talking about?" My mother's hand found his wrist again. "It's arranged, Tom." A small pat. Arranged. And that told me more than the check ever could. My father nodded slowly, unhappily, but he nodded. It was the nod of a man who had been given one version of events and was now watching it fail to match the room. "It's arranged." Somewhere inside those 2 words was a story I hadn't been told, but my father had, and whatever that story was, it had my name attached to it. I opened the folder. $5,300. I read it the way I read everything, from top to bottom. That's another thing about teachers. We grade for a living. We read the entire page. Dinner for 8. 2 $240 Cabernets, a champagne toast, a $400 terrace room fee, tax, and a 22% automatic service charge for parties of 8 or more. Everything was already totaled. A finished evening, itemized line by line. Every expense had been ordered before I ever touched the door, right down to the toast they had raised while I was still driving up the hill. And in the top corner, in small gray print, was the detail I'd been looking for since I opened the folder. Printed 8:40 p.m., I arrived at 8:55. 15 minutes before I walked in, someone at that table had already called for the ending. They hadn't simply eaten without me. They had closed out the night, requested the bill, arranged the stage, and then sat there finishing their champagne while waiting for the 9th guest. Not to arrive. To settle. "Don't make a scene at their anniversary," Courtney said softly, watching my face. She said it kindly. That's the part people never believe. How kind their voices can sound when the trap is closing. "It's their night, Rosie. It's been a wonderful night," my mother added. She said it to the Hollands, to the room, her eyes moving around the table. Then finally to me. No. At me. "You've always been the strong one, sweetheart." A small smile. "Don't stop tonight." There it was. The blue cast, 24 years later, dressed up for dinner. "You're the strong one." The sentence that had been a job description all along was being offered once again as a compliment, this time in front of witnesses, with a $5,300 invoice attached. Everyone was watching me. The Hollands had the particular discomfort of guests who understood too late what they had been invited to witness. Deb had a hand at her throat. Preston looked mildly curious, like a man watching a family ritual he assumed had been agreed upon beforehand. My father had rising, unfocused alarm. My mother and sister had no alarm at all. They had the settled patience of people who had performed this routine before and had never seen it fail. And in one way, they were right. The old Rosie would have paid. I could feel that old instinct in my hands. 3 decades of habit. Reach for the purse. Make it stop. Be the strong one. Fix the situation. 12 years of teaching teenagers has taught me many things, but the biggest lesson is this. The loudest person in the room is almost never the one in control. Control is quiet. Control belongs to the person who has already done her homework. I didn't reach for my purse. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice because I have never needed to raise my voice. Not in a classroom of 30 and not here. I simply raised my hand to shoulder height, 2 fingers up, the exact gesture I use across a cafeteria. A server appeared beside me. "Would you ask Mr. Sullivan to come to the table, please?" A ripple moved around the linen. My sister's smile widened into something almost affectionate, and she leaned back in her chair, comfortable and certain, then delivered the line she had clearly been saving for this exact moment. The line that told me she had studied this restaurant's rules far more carefully than any innocent guest ever would. "They don't split checks for parties, sweetie." "I know," I said. "I'm not splitting anything." Nate Sullivan crossed the dining room the way good managers do. Unhurried, unreadable, a man arriving at a table that might just be about to compliment the fish. He stopped at my shoulder, dark suit, steady eyes. He did not look at the photograph clipped to the host's stand 60 feet behind him, and neither did I. "Ma'am?" The whole table was watching, still smiling, most of them. My mother's eyes made one last sweep of her audience. I looked up at him and asked my question. "Remember what I asked you earlier?" He nodded once. Such a small thing, a nod, barely a movement, but I watched it travel around that table like a dropped glass. My mother's hostess smile stayed in place, but something behind it went on alert. Courtney sat forward 2 inches, and I kept my eyes on Nate Sullivan. Then I asked the question I had been carrying up that mountain all night. "Would you tell my family, please, what you were told about this evening? The instructions your desk was given, all of them." "Rosie," my mother's voice was a low warning sweeping across the room. "This is not the place." "It's exactly the place, Mom. They wrote it down here." Nate Sullivan clasped his hands in front of him, and when he spoke, his voice was the most neutral sound I had ever heard. No anger, no theater, just a man reading the minutes of a meeting, which in a way he was. "The reservation this evening was made for 7, he said. "Party of 8 under the name Collier Marsh. The party provided our desk with a written instruction sheet." He paused just slightly. "The instructions asked that the check for the full evening be presented to a 9th guest arriving at 9. A photograph of the guest was provided to our staff for identification purposes. The sheet also notes that the 9th guest is not being seated for dinner service." Another pause, precise as punctuation. The check was requested and printed at 8:40 before the guest arrived. The silence that followed had a texture. I could hear the candle on the table burning. 8 faces did 8 different things, and I watched every one of them because I had earned the right to watch. Carol Holland looked down at her dessert plate as if it had accused her of something. Jean studied the city lights through the glass with tremendous focus. Rye set his water glass down so carefully it made no sound at all. Aunt Deb's hand came up over her mouth, and above it her eyes were shining. They were fixed on my mother. Preston turned his head slowly, looked at his wife, and said in a quiet, conversational voice that cut under everything, "You told me she was coming late because of work." Courtney didn't answer him. Courtney had stopped moving entirely. And my father rose, not quickly. He pushed himself up with both hands flat on the table, the way he stands up from under a truck. He stayed there half bent, staring at the manager as if the man were speaking a language he'd heard once in a dream. "A photograph," my father said. "What photograph? Whose photograph?" "Mine, Dad," I said gently. "It's clipped to the host stand right now. You can go look. It's from your 65th birthday. I let that sit for 1 second. They cropped me out of it." My mother moved to seize control. "I'll give her this. She is fast." "This is all being blown completely out of proportion," she announced, warm and reasonable to the Hollands and Deb, her eyes sweeping. "There was obviously a mix-up with the desk. These places, they get things wrong. The desk got it wrong." Courtney seized the rope her mother threw, and her voice came back to life, bright and brittle. "That's it. That's clearly what happened. The girl up front confused the... We never left any." She waved a hand at the folder, at Nate, at all of it. "I've never even spoken to these people." The table wanted to believe her. I could feel it. the whole room leaning toward the exit she was building because believing her meant dessert could resume being dessert. Nate Sullivan looked at my sister with the mildest expression I had ever seen on a human face. "You dropped the photograph off yourself on Thursday, ma'am," he said. I was at the desk. Somewhere in the main dining room, a fork touched a plate. That was the only sound in the world. My sister's mouth opened and stayed open and produced nothing. And I want to pause here and tell you something about my sister, because it matters. Courtney is not stupid. Courtney is the product of 33 years of a system that always caught her. Every fumbled fact of her life had been caught by our mother's hands before it hit the ground. She lied the way tightrope walkers dance beautifully, and only because she had never once been allowed to feel the fall. There was no net in the terrace room, just a manager who had been standing at his own desk on Thursday afternoon. "Mr. Sullivan," I said into that silence, "may I ask you a few questions? Small ones." "Of course." "Am I on this reservation?" "No, ma'am." "Have I ordered anything this evening? A drink? Anything at all?" "No, ma'am." "Have I presented a card or offered any form of payment at any point tonight to anyone on your staff?" "No, ma'am." I looked at the leather folder in front of me. $5,300 of someone else's evening, printed before I arrived, delivered on a rehearsed nod. Then I asked the last one, "Then whose responsibility is this check?" "The reservation holder's, ma'am," Nate Sullivan said. And if his voice changed at all in that moment, it was only to become slightly more gentle, the way you're gentle around the newly bereaved. That's standard policy. The reservation was made and signed for by Mrs. Collier Marsh, a beat. We also hold a card on file from the deposit for the terrace room. And then he did the thing I will remember on my deathbed. He reached down and with 2 fingers, the same 2 fingers, the exact same gesture my sister had used on me, he rotated the leather folder 180 degrees and slid it back down the length of that table, past the dead champagne, past the scraped dessert plates, until it stopped in front of Courtney. My sister looked down at the check, and my sister went white. I don't mean pale. I mean the color left her face the way water leaves a sink, fast and total from the forehead down. The tan, the blush, the highlighter, all of it suddenly sitting on top of nothing. She stared at that folder as if it were ticking, and her hands stayed in her lap. She did not touch it because touching it made it hers, and it had always been hers. Nobody spoke. My mother's eyes swept the room and found no audience she wanted. The Hollands were examining the tablecloth. Deb was crying without sound. Preston was looking at his wife the way a man looks at a car that has just made an expensive noise. I stood up. There was nothing to push back. I'd never been given a chair, so standing was easy. I opened my purse, and I watched half the table flinch toward Hope. One last reflex of the old system. She's reaching for her card. The strong one is reaching for her card. I took out a package wrapped in brown paper. I set it on the tablecloth in the space where a 9th place setting would have gone, and I peeled the paper back so they could see it. 1986, the church steps. My mother, 24 years old and laughing so hard her eyes are shut. The water stain gone from the corner, like the last 40 years hadn't happened yet. My mother looked at the photograph of the woman she used to be. And for one unguarded second, her face forgot to check the room first. "Happy anniversary," I said. 3 words. That was the whole speech. Everything else I might have said, the manager had already said better in writing, in their own handwriting. I turned and walked toward the terrace door, past the glass wall with the whole city glittering under it, and I made it 3 steps before my father's voice caught me. "Rosie." He had come around the table. He stood between me and the door, his tie crooked, his reading glasses still pushed up on his head from squinting at the dessert menu hours ago. And he asked me the question my mother had spent 6 months making sure he would never ask. "Rosie, did you offer to pay for tonight?" Behind him, the table had gone very still. "No, Dad," I said. "I was told dinner started at 9. I watched it happen in his face. I watched confusion arrive, then arithmetic, and then understanding. And I would give a year of my life to have spared him the last one. My father is not a fast man, but he is a thorough one. He doesn't skim anything, and he did not skim this. 7, 9. A photograph. An instruction sheet. It's arranged, Tom. He turned around, he looked at my mother down the length of that ruined, beautiful table, and he asked the room a question, but he asked it only to her. She never offered, did she? It wasn't even a question by the time it left him. It was a grade. My mother said nothing. My mother, who has an answer for everything, who has managed every room she has ever stood in, looked at her husband of 40 years and said nothing at all. And her silence was the loudest confession of the night. And I watched the color drain out of her face the way it had drained out of my sister's. And I understood that I was watching the second person go white at that table, and that this one had nothing to do with money. Then she rallied. Of course she rallied, cornered in front of the Hollands, in front of her sister. My mother went to the only weapon that had never once failed her. After everything this family has done for you, she began, her voice trembling on cue, her eyes starting their sweep. I sent $400 a month for 3.5 years, Mom. I didn't say it loudly. I said it the way I return a test. Flat, factual, already graded. 42 months, first of every month, sent to Courtney for you and Dad because you told me she handled your bills. I looked at my sister, who had gone from white to something greener. Ask Courtney where it went. If the manager's recital had been a dropped glass, this was the shelf coming off the wall. Deb's head snapped toward Courtney. Carol Holland stopped pretending to study the tablecloth. And my father took the notebook out of his shirt pocket. In the middle of all of it, in a silent room in a 5-star restaurant, my 67-year-old dad put on his reading glasses and opened his little grease-darkened notebook and began to turn pages with his thumb, because a man should know what he owes. But it was Preston who spoke. And this is the part nobody at that table saw coming, including me, because I had spent so many years watching my family that I had never really watched him. What? $400? Quiet, conversational, the temperature of a bank vault. Courtney turned to her husband, and I watched her rebuild her face in real time. The smile, the lightness. Babe, it's nothing. It's a family thing. Mom and I had an arrangement for the bills. Into which account? 4 words, softer than the first 3. Preston Marsh, who handled his family's books, and who I later learned could quote their monthly statements from memory, was not shouting. He had simply turned toward his wife with his full attention, possibly for the first time in years, and started to audit. Preston, $400 a month is $14,800 a year, he said, speaking to no one, to the tablecloth, to the math itself. For 3.5 years. His eyes came up. I've never seen it. Not one deposit, which means it went somewhere I don't see. I didn't raise his voice on the last sentence. He lowered it. And my sister, who had walked into that room owning the evening, who had slid a $5,000 check down a table with 2 fingers, sat between her mother's silence and her husband's arithmetic, with nowhere left to stand. Caught between 2 ledgers, both of them honest, neither of them hers. My father stopped turning pages. I had it. I knew the page. I'd seen it in his kitchen in November. He looked at it for a long moment, and then he looked up at Courtney over the top of his reading glasses. My father, who had said almost nothing since the manager arrived, said 2 words. The water heater. That was all. 2 words. And I watched my sister's last color disappear because Courtney knew the notebook. Everyone in this family knew the notebook. She knew exactly what was written on that line, whose name it carried, and whose money it had actually been. And she understood, right there in front of witnesses, in the time it took to say 2 words, that our father was now going to reread 3.5 years of his own gratitude with a red pen. I could have stayed. Part of me wanted to. There is a version of this story where I stand at the head of that table and watch every last brick come down. And I won't lie to you. I could taste it. But I have graded enough tests to know when my work is finished. The rest of that room's business belonged to the people still sitting in it. Whatever happened next between my mother and my father, between Preston and his wife, between Deb and her sister, it was theirs. They had built it. They could sit in it. My part of the evening was finally finished, and unlike their dinner, I hadn't needed to print the ending in advance. Good night, Dad. Just him. And I walked out of the terrace room through the dining room, where every table was suddenly very interested in their entrees. I stopped at the host stand, where a photograph of my face was still clipped to the corner of the reservation sheet. Nate Sullivan had followed me out. He unclipped the photo himself and handed it to me with both hands, the way you return something to its owner. "I believe this is yours, ma'am." "It always was," I said. I was 10 feet from the valet stand, keys almost in my hand, when I heard heels on the pavement behind me. Fast, then slowing, then arranging themselves into a walk. My mother leaving her own anniversary to chase the daughter she hadn't fed. "Rosemary, wait." The valet stand at La Vista Deli sits under a row of white lights, the kind that flatter no one. And when I turned around, my mother stood in them looking 10 years older than she had at the table. The pearls, the good dress, and underneath all of it, suddenly just a 64-year-old woman on a curb out of an audience. "Please," she said. I waited. I had spent 36 years waiting. I could do 5 more minutes, and then my mother did something she had never done in my presence. She lowered her voice, not the church whisper, not the warning tone. She genuinely lowered it, down to something unrehearsed. And what came out of her was the truest thing she had said to me in years. "You don't know what it's been like," she said. "Your father's heart, the bills, the house. He can't work, Rosie. He can't ever work again." And I lie awake doing numbers in my head. Her hands moved, helpless, describing something invisible and heavy. "I can't be the one holding this family's plates when they fall. I can't. You can. You've always been able to. I want to be honest with you, because this story is worthless if I'm not." For 3 seconds, standing under those white lights, I almost reached for her hand because it was true. That part was true, and I could hear that it was true. She was scared. She had been scared for 4 years, since a Tuesday in October when my father's heart made a mistake, and fear had been driving the whole machine the way fear usually drives the machines that run over people. For 3 seconds, she wasn't the director. She was just my mom, old and frightened in a parking lot. And every cell in my body that has ever loved her, which is all of them. That's the terrible part. It's always all of them. Lean toward her. And then I did the thing she taught me herself without meaning to. I reread the page. I ran her whole speech back through my head, sentence by sentence, the way I run a student's essay, looking for the missing thesis. Your father's heart. The bills. You can hold the plates. You've always been able to. And I found what was missing. There was no sorry in it anywhere. Not for the photograph handed to strangers, not for 9, not for a check printed at 8:40, not for a table set for 8, not for 42 months of my money wearing my sister's name in my father's notebook. Her speech was full of fear and completely empty of apology. And once I heard that, I couldn't unhear it. I understood at last what I was actually being handed under those lights. It wasn't a confession. It was a job posting. The same job. The strong one. Position open, benefits unchanged. "You're not sorry," I said. Not accusing, just reading it aloud. "You're rehiring." Her chin came up, and the softness dropped away like it had a timer on it. And there was the woman from the terrace room. "You embarrassed us, Rosemary." Her voice shook, and for once the shake was real. "In front of the Hollands, in front of your aunt. 40 years of marriage, and my own daughter turns our anniversary into a scene with the staff in public." And that was it. That was the whole truth of my mother standing in a parking lot saying it out loud at last. Not "you're hurt." Not "we went too far." "You embarrassed us." The photograph didn't wound her. The instruction sheet didn't shame her. 600 feet of restaurant hearing the truth. That was the crime. Her daughter had not been damaged tonight. Her audience had. Even now, even here, her eyes flicked past my shoulder to the glass doors, checking whether anyone was watching. There was no one, just us. My mother, I realized, had followed me out here and found the one place on earth she had no use for, a room with no audience in it. And she didn't know how to stand in it. "You told that restaurant more truth about me than you've told me in years, Mom," I said. "They got a photograph and a plan. I got a time, and it was the wrong one on purpose." "Rosie, you're the strong one." She said it with both hands out now, reaching for the oldest tool on the belt, the one that had never once failed. "You've always been?" "No." One word. I heard it land. "I was the convenient one," I said. "Those aren't the same." It took me 24 years and one dinner to learn the difference, but I know it now, and I can't unknow it. And I need you to hear the next part clearly because I'm only going to say it once. The mountain air was cold. Somewhere behind the glass, a server was probably clearing 8 dessert plates and 1 untouched wedding photo. I'm done paying to be your daughter. My mother stood very still under the white lights, and I watched her search me. My face, my hands, my purse, looking for the crack, the reflex, the 12-year-old with the blue cast who glowed when you called her strong. She looked for a long time. The girl wasn't there. I'd left her at the table next to the check. I got in my car. My mother did not follow me to the curb, and I knew she wouldn't. And it didn't hurt the way it should have because I finally understood it. Of course, she didn't follow me. There was no audience in the parking lot. The road down from the foothills unwinds in long curves, and the whole city comes up at you out of the dark. 100,000 porch lights, all those kitchens, all those tables set for however many people actually live there. I drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, and I was fine. I was fine. I was completely fine. And then I caught a red light at Campbell and Skyline, and I wasn't. It came up out of me all at once from somewhere under the floor of the car, and I cried the way you cry maybe 5 times in a life. Hands at 10 and 2, shoulders shaking, ugly and honest. Not for the check, not even for the photograph. I cried for a 12-year-old walking herself to the nurse's office, holding her own arm like a package, so proud of not needing anyone. Somebody should have come for that kid. Somebody should have signed that cast. The light turned green. I wiped my face with the back of my wrist and drove home. And by the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone was lighting up in the cup holder like a small fire. 11 notifications. The first one was from the last person I expected, Aunt Deb. 11:20 p.m. She must have typed it in the car before she was even off the mountain. I didn't know about the photograph, honey. None of us did. I'm ashamed. I ate. I read it 4 times. I'm ashamed I ate. 60 years old, and she'd found the exact right sentence. The one that told me she understood precisely what that table had been. Not a dinner I missed, but a meal they'd all had off my back, and that she was done pretending otherwise. I slept better than I had any right to. Sunday morning, my sister launched her counteroffensive because of course she did. The family group chat, the one I'm still in for logistics, the one that had been silent toward me for 6 months, lit up at 9 a.m. with a wall of text. I'll spare you most of it. The load-bearing sentence was, I can't believe Rosie ambushed Mom and Dad's anniversary and humiliated this family in public over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, the written instructions, the photograph she personally delivered on Thursday, the checks she'd had printed before I arrived. I didn't respond. I didn't need to because my sister, in her whole gilded life, had never once absorbed the most basic fact about that evening. It had witnesses. 7 of them, not counting the staff. People who had sat there and heard a calm man in a dark suit read her plan back to her from his own records. Aunt Deb replied within the minute. 1 sentence. No punctuation wasted. We were all there, Courtney. Nobody typed anything after that. The group chat has been silent since, and I've decided the silence is the most honest thing it's ever produced. The bill, though, I know you're wondering about the bill because I was too. Deb told me on the phone that Wednesday, when the evening finally mercifully died, it was Preston who paid all of it. $5,300, $536 to be exact. And by then, I had earned the right to be exact. He put down his own card without one word, Deb said. Didn't look at his wife. Didn't look at anyone. Signed it like a man signing a receipt for a tow truck. And then over the following week, quietly, Preston Marsh did what Preston Marsh does. He audited. Deb heard it from my mother, who told it as a grievance, which is how I know it's true. The joint accounts were restructured. The credit cards came off the table. My sister, who had run a private economy on my $400 a month for 3.5 years, precisely because her marriage gave her an allowance instead of access, now had less access than ever. And a husband who knew exactly why. I want to be careful here because this is the part where a story like mine can curdle into something I don't want it to be. I did not enjoy that. I'm not going to pretend I did. What happened to my sister's marriage was not my doing and not my victory. It was simply her own arithmetic arriving. She had built a secret out of my money, and secrets built out of other people's money have a way of getting delivered to your door with the original invoice attached. She called me that Thursday twice. The first call I let ring out because her first calls are always fury, and I've retired from that job too. The second time she left a voicemail. 2 minutes and change. I listened to the whole thing standing in my kitchen. Most of it was what you'd expect. I'd ruined everything. I'd always been jealous. Mom was devastated. But near the end, her voice dropped out of its script for just a few seconds, and my sister said the one honest thing I have ever heard her say. "You think I married money?" she said, tired, almost laughing. "I married an audit. I have to ask permission to buy shampoo. Rosie, you've had your own everything since you were 22. You have no idea." And there it was underneath the entitlement, under the white dresses at other people's parties. A woman who had been handed a beautiful cage at 27 and had been quietly stealing seed money from her sister ever since, because stealing from me was safer than asking him. For one breath, standing at my counter, I felt the thing you're not supposed to feel for the person who slid you a $300 check. I felt sorry for her. I didn't call back. Both things are true, and I've stopped needing them not to be. You can understand exactly why someone became a thief and still changed the locks. Then Thursday's mail came, and my mother had the last word. She always does. A plain envelope. My name in her handwriting. No letter. 3 $20 bills pressed flat like she'd ironed them. A note the size of a gift tag for the photo restoration. "We don't need charity." I stood at my mailbox for a long time. She had found the little gold sticker on the back of the frame, the shop's label with the price penciled beside it, and she had done the one thing her operating system knew how to do with love. She had located the invoice, $60 returned in full, not the photograph. She kept the photograph, just the money, so the gift could be turned into a transaction, and the transaction could be closed, and no one would owe anyone anything, least of all a thank you. My mother thought she was refunding a payment. She didn't understand that she was confirming my entire story. Everything I'd said in that parking lot, notarized in 3 iron 20s. I took the $60 to school on Monday. It was the last week of the year. Room 114 was hot in the way Tucson classrooms get in late May. Ceiling fan ticking. And I put the money into my classroom library fund and turned it into 6 paperbacks for the Take One, Leave One shelf. It felt right. My mother's money finally arriving somewhere. Love doesn't get invoiced. And that same week, the last Friday of the school year, a girl stayed behind after the bell. Junior, one of mine, the kind of kid the staff room calls so mature for her age, which I have learned to hear as an alarm. She stood at my desk holding a late essay and explaining fast, the way you explain when you're used to needing a defense. Her little brothers, the dinner she cooks, her mom's double shifts. "I can handle it, Miss Collier. I just ran out of hours." I took the essay, and then I heard myself say the sentence I'd needed somebody to say to me in a hospital room 24 years ago. Being able to carry it doesn't mean it's yours to carry. She looked at me the way you look at a door you didn't know was there. Then she nodded and left for the summer, and I sat in room 114 under the ticking fan for a while. 36 years old, finally on both ends of that sentence at once. That Saturday morning, Memorial Day weekend, I opened my curtains with a cup of coffee in my hand. My father's truck was parked in my driveway. He was sitting on my porch step, not knocking. My father would consider knocking before 9 on a Saturday to be a form of assault. He was just sitting there in his good flannel shirt with 2 paper cups of gas station coffee beside him, one for each of us, because he had driven 25 minutes on faith that I would open the door. He'd bought 2 coffees. I stood behind my own front door for a second and let that undo me a little. He bought 2. "Hey, Rosie girl." "Hey, Dad." I sat down next to him on the step. The coffee was terrible. It was the best coffee of my adult life. For a while, we just watched my street do its Saturday things. A neighbor dragging a hose, somebody's sprinkler ticking around, doves complaining on the power line. And then my father reached into his shirt pocket and took out the notebook. It looked different. It took me a moment to see why. He opened it flat on his knee to a page I recognized and turned it toward me the way he had in his kitchen in November, thumb under the line, except the line had changed. Water heater, $100. The name Courtney struck through with one clean pencil stroke, and above it, in his slanted mechanic's handwriting, small and deliberate, Rosie. He turned the page. Property tax, November 2023. Courtney struck through. Rosie. He turned another. Christmas ham, medications, March 2024. The porch repair. Page after page. 3.5 years of his own gratitude corrected line by line. Not ripped out, not scribbled over, struck through and reattributed each one in a way that kept the mistake visible underneath the truth. 42 entries. He'd counted them too. Took me 3 evenings, he said. Kept having to stop. I didn't say anything. I couldn't have. I called the bank Monday, he went on, eyes on the notebook, voice steady in the way it's steady when he's under a truck and something is heavier than he expected. Move the bills back to me. All of them. Turns out I can work a phone fine when I'm angry enough. A pause. Your mother and I are talking some, not in the same language yet. Dad, you don't have to. I do, though. That's the thing. He closed the notebook and held it in both hands. He looked at me straight on, which my father does maybe twice a year. I've been thinking about what I knew, and I want to be honest with you because you've earned honest, and not much else has been going around. He took a breath. I didn't know about the money. I didn't know about the photograph or the 9 or any of what that dinner was. I'd have burned the place down first. And I think you know that. I know that. But he turned the coffee cup a slow half circle on the step. I knew the checks always drifted to you. I knew your mother had a scale in her head and you were never on the right side of it. I knew, Rosie girl, for years, and I decided it was weather. Something in the house you don't fix. You just live around. He shook his head slowly. Not knowing was easier. That's on me. Nobody else. A ledger's only worth what's true in it, and mine had lies in it, and some of them were mine. My father has never in his life said devastated or heartbroken. He has a notebook instead of a vocabulary for pain. So I understood exactly what I was being handed on that porch step. 42 corrected lines, and a man assigning himself his own entry. It was the only apology anyone in my family had offered me in 36 years. And it was the only one I've ever needed, because it came with no request attached. He didn't ask me to forgive my mother. He didn't ask me to call my sister. He didn't ask me for a single dollar or a single performance of okayness. He asked me one thing. First Saturday of the month, he said, there's a diner on Oracle that does pancakes the size of a hubcap. Just us. No messages carried, no reports filed. I don't want to hear about your mother from you, and I won't make you hear about you from her. Just pancakes. Just pancakes, I said. First Saturday. First Saturday, Dad. He nodded, satisfied. A deal struck, and we drank terrible coffee on my step while the doves complained. And for the first time in my adult life, sitting beside a member of my family cost me exactly nothing. Before I let you go, I want to ask you something real. If you've ever been the strong one in your family, the one expected to carry it, pay it, smooth it, survive it, tell me in the comments one thing you finally put down. I read every single one, and I mean that. And if this story found the bruise, share it with someone who's still holding their family's plates, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Somebody out there is still standing in the hospital room, glowing at the wrong compliment. Maybe we reach her. Here's how it actually ends. Sunday afternoon, the day after the pancake trip, I cleaned out the week's mail, the flyers, the pizza coupons, a credit card offer promising me a better life at 24% interest. And at the bottom of the pile on my counter sat the photograph, the one from the host stand, my own face, cropped from my father's birthday, the shoulder cut away. I'd thought about what to do with it. In the 2 weeks it had lived face down on my counter, there were several possibilities. There's a version of this story where I burn it in the sink. Very cinematic. Smoke alarm and all. There's a version where I frame it. Dark trophy, lest we forget. I dropped it in the recycling bin between a grocery flyer and the credit card offer. No ceremony. No speech. It rode to the curb on Tuesday with everything else that had tried to sell me something I didn't need. And that, I've decided, was exactly the funeral it deserved. The other photograph, the real one, found a better wall. Deb told me on the phone because Deb tells me things now. We have lunch. It turns out my aunt is funny, My father took the 1986 wedding photo home from that restaurant, and he hung it in the kitchen himself, drove the nail, straightened the frame, stepped back. My mother, 24 years old, laughing under a clean sky, watching over a kitchen where the bills now get paid by a man with a corrected notebook. My mother, the elder, has not said a word about it, Deb reports, but she hasn't taken it down either. I don't know what happens to my mother and me. That's the honest ending, and you deserve the honest ending. There's been no apology, and I've stopped standing at the mailbox waiting for one. The $60 was her answer, and I've let it be her answer. If she ever comes looking for her daughter instead of an audience, the door has a bell. It rings for people who arrive without an invoice. What I know is this. On the first Saturday of June, there will be pancakes the size of hubcaps. In August, room 114 will fill up again with teenagers who think Gatsby is boring. And I will get to watch 30 faces find out otherwise, which is the best paid work in America, no matter what the salary says. My Corolla turned 12. I'm taking the Oregon trip this summer. 4 years late, paid in full, party of one, and the reservation is under my own name. And some nights I still think about that drive up the mountain. 25 minutes, both hands on the wheel, a wrapped gift on the passenger seat, a plan in my purse. My whole family sitting in a glass room believing they knew exactly how the strong one worked. My mother told me dinner started at 9. She was right about one thing. That night, something did start at 9. It just wasn't dinner. It was the rest of my life. And for the first time, nobody handed me the